Title: The Dream Eater. Mark had heard of sleep paralysis before, but he'd never experienced it until last night. He woke, his room dimly lit by the street lamp outside, shadows flickering across his walls. His body was rigid, pinned under an invisible weight, and all he could do was watch the shadows crawl. In the corner, just past his line of sight, he sensed something dark, watching him with unseen eyes. When the paralysis lifted, he gasped for air, his body drenched in sweat, his heartbeat thunderous. The next night, sleep came reluctantly, and again, he found himself paralyzed. This time, the sensation was sharper. He could feel someone leaning over him, its breath cold and rancid on his face. His chest tightened, his pulse hammering as he forced his eyes open, only to meet a pair of shadowy orbs staring into his. They were too close, too knowing, too hungry. He strained against the paralysis, but his body betrayed him. Only when the thing faded into the darkness did his muscles finally obey. Mark lay there trembling, the phantom touch lingering. The nightmares grew worse over the next few days. Each time he slipped into sleep, the thing grew bolder. Its icy fingers grazed his skin, leaving trails of numbness, and it whispered words he couldn't understand but knew were curses. He tried to stay awake, guzzling coffee, pacing his apartment, but exhaustion always won. The figure always returned. Its presence became a looming inevitability, an unstoppable tide dragging him under. Mark started seeing it in his waking hours, a glimpse of it in the reflection of a darkened window, a shadow that lingered longer than it should have in the corner of his vision. It stalked him at the edge of perception, a silent predator savoring the hunt. He told himself it wasn't real, that it was his sleep-deprived mind playing tricks, but the feeling of dread was visceral, undeniable. One night, out of sheer exhaustion, Mark succumbed to a fitful sleep. He awoke to the familiar weight on his chest, a cold, bony hand pressed against his throat. This time, he couldn't look away. The creature was fully visible now, a dark figure with hollow, endless eyes that sucked all the light from the room. Its face stretched into a grotesque smile, its teeth jagged and glistening as if wet with something vile. What do you want?" he managed to choke out, his voice trembling. The creature's voice was a raspy whisper, like dead leaves scraping across stone. I want you to stay." Mark's heart skipped. Stay? The figure leaned closer, its breath icy against his cheek. In the dream, the realization hit him like a punch. It wasn't feeding on his dreams. It was feeding on him. Every nightmare, every sleepless night, it had been consuming a part of him, leaving him hollow and weaker with each encounter. He was being drained, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. With a Herculean effort, he tore himself awake, bolting upright in bed. The room was empty, silent except for his frantic breathing. He clutched his chest, his skin clammy and cold. Relief washed over him, but it was fleeting. Something felt wrong, like a missing puzzle piece he couldn't place. He turned to the mirror on his nightstand, only to see a reflection that wasn't quite right. His face was there, but something was missing, the warmth in his eyes, the familiar spark of his expression. It was a pale, hollow shell, like he'd been drained. And then he saw it, the figure, lurking just behind him in the mirror, its grotesque smile wider than ever, jagged teeth glinting in the dim light. It wasn't a reflection. It was inside the glass, staring back at him. A scream rose in his throat, but the reflection didn't move. It only whispered, "Now, the dream begins." Mark turned, desperate to flee, but his legs wouldn't move. His surroundings warped, the walls stretching and shifting like melting wax. The air grew heavy, suffocating, and the faint hum of reality dimmed. He realized with mounting terror that he hadn't woken up at all. The dream had swallowed him whole.